teams function in a very specific way. Your teams form, storm, norm, and then they perform. That is the way all teams function. Okay. So if you have a basic understanding of leadership and how teams work and function, then you know you don't want to stay in storming stage because internally your team is not functioning anymore. So thus you're not an effective leader. You haven't thought about from a customer perspective, if this was my customer and I needed them to do something.
Welcome to D50 After Dark, where we have conversations with the most influential Toastmasters in District 50. I'm your host, Mickey Bennett, and today we will be having one more conversation with our Quality Contest Chair, Bonnie Dubin. We'll be discussing leadership. Stay tuned. Welcome back to D50 After Dark, Bonnie. I've had so much fun talking to you about contests and speeches and getting to know you. We want to have one more conversation with you for now until you get your DTM and come back to the show. I'm going to hold you to that.
All right.
You are a professional in teaching people about leadership. Mm-hmm. And a big part of Toastmasters is leadership. A lot of people think of Toastmasters as the place to go learn to give a public speech. That's true, but our tagline for our organization is where leaders are made. So let's talk about leadership.
One of my favorite subjects, that along with teams and how teams work and function, which of course is needed to be known how that works for you to be a good leader. I'm going to start out by going back to a word you kept using in our last conversation, that's inspiring. I teach leaders here, and when I talk about leadership, I want people to know my thought process in that I don't think the word motivation is what we should use as leaders. I think we should inspire anyone on our team or anyone we're speaking to be self-motivated into whatever direction we need them to go. So using your inspiration word before is usually my tag, and I try to hold people accountable as leaders to teach their team how to be self-motivated through their inspiration of doing so.
I like where you're going with this. Let me ask you, so what is the difference between motivation and inspiration?
When you're inspired by somebody, so you hear a speaker that inspires you enough to actually make a change in something, that to me is where we should go as leaders. I can have a motivational moment. There's some speakers over the years that I've heard, and I'm like, I'm motivated for the moment. But when I get back home, my husband might say, well, what did they talk about? And it's like, at this point, I forgot. So I was motivated in the moment. I wasn't self-motivated or inspired enough to go further with it. I think leaders' job is to help that inspiration continue to go so that self-motivation is always perpetuated to continue bettering someone and in hopes bring them into some kind of leadership process as well.
So it kind of makes me think of a line that you often hear in Toastmasters and other places is that people might forget what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
True.
Right.
Feeling is a thing in our world today. It's all about feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So what do you make them feel? I think leadership has changed over the years. You have to remember, I started training back in the early 80s. And the thought of leadership then was way different than the way leaders are done and taught now. Particularly in my field of healthcare, it's way more about leading and teaching and understanding customer service with the understanding that you, the leader, your customer is actually your team, and the team's customer is actually the patients. So that's the format that I use teaching here. And I think that could be in any field. When you're the leader, when you have a title, you're in the relationship business, which means your customer is creating that relationship with your team so that they can further do and perpetuate further down the line into what their customer base is, which would be your paying people for whatever business you might be in.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you said there. And it reminds me of a project in Toastmasters where we talk about leadership styles, like a director or a collaborator and all that stuff. And so a lot of people think of being a leader as being the person who tells people what to do. And certainly there's a time where people need to know what to do. But what you're saying is you change the whole context of leadership to being, these are your customers. And so as customers, what do you do as a leader? Like if your team is your customers, then
tell them
something, or what do you mean?
Well, you're still giving them direction and in essence telling them what to do. But I think the difference nowadays is to inspire them to be self-motivated in how they would actually do it. So the overwhelming, since I teach soft skills, everybody's going to look at communication, conflict resolution, diversity and inclusion, generations, huge conversation differences there from a different point of view. As the leader, you need to set the tone on, first off, how you feel about those subjects, but more importantly, getting feedback from the team on how each of them individually feel about it, so that when you're communicating with one another, and that ties back to Toastmasters, how can I best communicate my thought process, but let the other person communicate their thought process? So I think we've become a world in the leadership realm of trying to create that relationship more with the individual team members. That doesn't mean, and I hope I didn't allude to that you're not giving direction and saying, here's your job and those kind of things. You are doing that, but you have to format the conversation individually to be picked up and inspired enough for that person to see that they have buy-in. When you create buy-in, same thing on that stage in the contest. If you have buy-in from that audience, you're more likely to get a higher score. If you bought the judges into what you've been talking about, no matter what it is, you're probably going to get a higher score from your speech. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I keep coming back to this this idea of your team being your customer, because I think that it's really great, like switching around of the context of it. But let's maybe look at an example. So if you have someone on your team and you need them to complete twice as many tasks as they have been completing, how do you approach that with this mindset that they're your customer?
Okay. Well, it's kind of reverse conversation. So let me start from them talking to the actual customer. The best people who do well in pitching something they want someone else to do is to ask enough questions to get the buy-in from the other person. So that's the same thing with the leader. Here's the job of our team. Our team has been asked and requested by the powers that be above us to raise whatever it is, the widgets we're selling, 10%. Yeah. So team, knowing that, how are each of you going to make that happen? Tell me what you're going to do. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. My voice is wearing out here. How are you going to make that happen? And then you have that conversation with them. And then if it falls in the parameters of, okay, yes, that's great. Each of you can go do it, go. Or let's hone in a little bit more so that we're all sort of coming in the same field. Let's get buy-in and figure out how we're going to ebb and flow more streamlined together. That's how the leader creates the customer as their team, by drawing them in through the questions. And then they are learning how to pull more stuff out of their back end, which their customer is usually the person who's actually using your services in one way or another, depending on your. So for a nurse in healthcare, it would be the patient itself. How do I talk better? Well, here's what my team leader has taught me in conversation, that we talk to each other and we explore how each of us feel about something. Now you go back to your patient and do the same thing. We get higher scores. Because healthcare is all about scores. How high in customer service or what's called patient satisfaction can we get those scores to go?
Yeah. Okay. So I like it. So you have your team be customers in part by using questions to facilitate their progress.
Yes, and to get an understanding. So teams function in a very specific way. Your teams form, storm, norm, and then they perform. That is the way all teams function. Okay. So if you have a basic understanding of leadership and how teams work and function, then you know you don't want to stay in storming stage because internally your team is not functioning anymore. So thus you're not an effective leader. You haven't thought about from a customer perspective, if this was my customer and I need them to do something, how do I get them out of here and at least to a norm conversation and hopefully collectively to a good performing team of people. My team, not that they're not perfect, but they are some of the best well-oiled people that I know. We all know what each other does. We all know how we can back each other up. We do 3 distinct different things between 5 of us for a huge health system. We're all about our customer is other employees. So basically, we never touch a patient, though at the end of the day, the true customer for Willis Knighton is indeed the patient. Does that make sense? So there's a tie-in of coming down the streamline there and trying to be as high in the performance end as often as possible and stay out of the storming stage of any team, which is where communication isn't happening.
I like that. So that progression of a team was form, where the team created.
Right. So this is where retention, again, leadership in most industries now is all about retaining your employees, because every time you lose and or add someone, you got to start over again. You got to reform your team. Storming is where most communication comes in. So this is the great thing for any leader to join Toastmasters is teaching you how to better communicate what you need so that there's not a lot of misunderstanding and controversy going on here. And we can at least be in the middle section as often as possible. You know, since COVID in particular, if you look at a lot of statistic data, most companies across our country, at least, are stuck in the storming stage. They haven't gotten back to some kind of normalcy because that was so drastic for almost every industry, if not all, across our country. And so I think it's just going back to the basics of person-to-person conversation and upping your skills in that and understanding that not everybody thinks and talks like you do, but that doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them different.
Yeah. And so then once you get past the miscommunication of the storming phase, you reach norm. And then
I call that the instinct, where everything seems to go in a process and stuff. You still might have hiccups and you occasionally might bump back to storming, but it feels like you're in a normalcy of some kind.
And then beyond norm, there is, did you say performing? Performing. Okay. And so that's where your team is achieving at higher levels.
Achieves at higher levels. And if there's a hiccup, it's simply that, a hiccup. Everybody knows how to pick it up, move it on. They don't worry about why or how it happened, but what are we not going to do so that doesn't happen again? There is a final stage called adjourning, and that would happen, if I retired and left this team, we would adjourn as a team as we know it, and then the team would have to start over again informing. But I usually concentrate on these 4 when I'm teaching leadership skills.
So in Toastmasters, that happens every 6 months when you have a new officer team. Oftentimes, a lot of the same people, maybe not, but they pass on the leadership to the next officer team. And so the previous team is adjourning for the new team to be formed.
Correct. That is correct. And I didn't know that happened, but now I do.
Yeah. My club just had our officer election last night. So we were voting on who's going to fill each officer role for the next 6 months for the January through June officer term. And
interesting.
So we are adjourning the current officer team to form the new team. I never really thought about it that way, because I just thought, okay, well, we've got some new officers and we have some same officers. But in a sense, anytime one person leaves or enters the team, you're kind of adjourning and reforming your team all over again.
And you always go through storming, Mickey, always. So the trick is in Toastmasters, I think, if you're changing board members every 6 months, is how quickly can we all get together and how we're going to communicate and run this Toastmaster team of ours collectively so that we can feel normalcy through each of our meetings every week.
That is great. I love it. I am inspired to think of teams in a new way based on your progression from forming to adjourning. I think that it's definitely given me something to think about, and very appropriate time. As I said, my leadership team in my club is about to reform. So thank you so much.
You bet.
Before we say goodbye for now, do you have any one last call to action for our listeners?
Sure. Well, I'll just tag on. I'm going to call action to your own club. Do a little research. All you have to do is put in 5 stages of a team, read a little bit about them, and have everyone on your new board read that so that you can quickly progress to the norming and hopefully performing stage as quickly as possible and be as successful as you can as a new team leading your club.
And what's the search term we should enter?
5 stages of a team.
5 stages of a team.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and just one other thing for you is I know you have multiple businesses and you do some things with motivation and other things. Is there a website that people can learn more about you and the things that you're up to?
No.
Nope. Okay.
As long as I'm at Willis Knighton, it's all proprietary what I do. Okay. If you want to reach out to me, you can, ask a Toastmaster and I'll be glad to have a side note. But no, I don't have a website anymore or any of that at the moment. Until I leave here and decide to retire from here, it's just kind of a side gig at the moment.
Okay, fair enough. But if you want to learn more about contests, you can go to d50pm.org and click on the contest menu and learn all about that. And do a search for the 5 stages of a team.
Sure.
Bonnie, it's been so much fun talking to you about contests, about Speechcraft, and now about leadership. It's really been a great conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
You bet. Totally my pleasure. I look forward to meeting you in person one day.
Yeah, at the spring conference.
Well, let's hope so. Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Good night. And for our listeners, thank you so much for listening in. I hope you learned a lot. I know I sure did. And stay tuned next time when we have a new guest in D50 After Dark. Thank you.